Hi, my name is Stephanie Chu, and this is my second video blog. And today I'll be talking about one of the articles that I used in my scavenger hunt. So the article I chose was Fanfiction Online, Engagement, Critical Response, and Effective Play Through Writings by Angela Thompson. Okay, so the purpose of this article was one of the things was to challenge preconceptions about fanfic creation, demonstrates a range of writing practices that fans negotiate together to roleplay and engage with canonical text, critical analysis, the context which the practices occur, and consider what can be learned from fanfiction communities. So first of all, what do we need to talk about? We need to talk about what exactly is fanfiction. So according to the author, Angela Thompson, fanfiction is fiction that borrows setting, plots, characters, and ideas from all forms of media and popular culture. Fans weave together new tales, something within canon, the real works from which they are borrowing. So canon doesn't necessarily have to be like a TV show, but it can be books, movies, cartoons, etc. So on the side here, this is an example of something that somebody would do for fan fiction. This is picture of Molly and Sherlock from the BBC TV show Sherlock. And so often, a lot of times in fan fiction, people like to kind of, I guess you could say, match these two or ship these two together, and it's also known as like Sherlolly. Okay, so another type of fan fiction is what they call crossovers, which is when it's not solely one text, it's you imagine new possibilities and it's different settings built on existing stories, and it's called alternative universe fiction. And a lot of times people say like AU. So on the right is an example of what AU can be. So this is Steampunk AU. This is actually a character from Transformers. As you notice, it says Voltron on there. But as you notice in Transformers, it's very high-tech, versus this is Steampunk, which is late Victorian era. So this is another example of crossovers that they actually mention in the article, is the idea of Lord of the Rings, or LOTR meets Star Wars. So we have some of the characters from the Lord of the Rings series, but they're given weapons that would have been used in Star Wars. Okay, so one of the things that is talked a lot about in this article is certain assumptions that people make about fanfiction. So in order to analyze other aspects of it, you need to first of all cover certain assumptions. So one thing when it comes to especially young kids in literature is that it's not valuable for them to engage in fan fiction. And it goes against the teachings that you should create your own original characters. And so the author uses claims from another educator named Henry Jenkins. And one of the things that they say is that actually fanfiction can be a positive source for learning, that people can gain skills from their peers, and also too, it allows writers to focus on the process of writing the actual text than having to come up with new characters and settings. So another thing that is an assumption for fan fiction creation is the context of textual poaching, which is basically you take text from another source and you call it your own. But it's the idea that nothing new is created from it. So basically, you're lazy because you don't create your own characters. However, the author of this article counters that by saying that writers are active designers. So they basically take the canon material, literary works, own experiences, personal knowledge, and they create something that's completely new. And another way that they talk about is one of the girls that are interviewed for a part of this article, they say that she does creates fan fiction, as a way to explore multiple storylines that are not explored in the canonical text. She gives the example Harry Potter. So another thing that they cover in this article is the idea of social practices of fan fiction. So the main research source that is used to cite in this article is a site known as Middle-earth Insanity, and it's an online community that's specially created for crossover fanfiction, which is Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, and AU collaborative writing. It's a web-based forum with 200 community members with ages from 13 to 70. It's asynchronous, which means the members are not necessarily online, and it was created by two teen girls named Tiana and Jandolph. And so the forum sections are divided into general, fanfiction, discussion, roleplay games, random insane stuff, moderation, and site comments. And so one of the main sections that I'm going to be talking about is roleplay games. Okay, so one of the things that they talk about when we're talking about roleplay games is that people create fanfiction based on roleplay chats. So basically what will happen is so several people come together on a forum together, and they will do some sort of role play when they create their own characters and interact within a text. So what a person will do is the individual writer will edit that text of that role play session to suit their own narrative needs. So they'll add things like one of the writers they talk about, they added emotions that she thought that a certain character would think about, or setting, or basically things to fill in the blanks between the responses. And so one of the girls, she said that she used this thing, what she called God modeling, which is basically she would get rid of certain things that people may say in the roleplay session, and that she would get rid of it so that it would create an actual narrative. So another thing that they found was it's a textual exchange. So another thing that would occur would be once the fiction is actually written, it would be posted and different members would critique other members so that people would learn their strengths and their weaknesses, and they would learn better writing skills. And it helped them evolve their writing through collaborative writing. Another thing they mentioned in this article, was that collaborative writing is not often used in schools because there's a focus on individuality, but they found that this form of collaborative writing was very helpful for people to improve their skills. So she also covered certain analysis of some of the social practices that came along with this form of writing. So one of them that they talked about was the idea of story versus discourse. So one of the things that I didn't mention earlier, but the two girls, Jandolph and Tiana, they also created a wide range of different pieces of fan fiction together. So fan art, diaries of different characters, and they would all put it together to create these stories. So one of the things that she was quoting was the idea that this sort of writing really pushes the idea of what narrative fiction can be. And so one of the things that they discuss here is the idea of story versus discourse. And so she cited another academic named Abbott. And so he said, we never see the story directly, but instead we always pick it up through the narrative discourse. So the story is always mediated by a voice, the style of writing, camera angles, actors' interpretation, so that we call the story is really something that we construct. It's together that we read it or see, often by influence. So they were really talking about how on the website that there was all these different styles of voices and that they came together to create this discourse that was different. Another thing that they talked about was that we understand the text mediated through the emotions of teen writers. So I wanted to give you an example that I found. Now, this was not the kind of fiction that was mentioned in the writing, but it kind of stuck out to me when I saw it. So this is a Pokemon fan fiction, I guess you could say. So it's basically about Ditto, and so Ditto is this Pokemon who basically changes. Like, that's his one little characteristic. So if you see here, it's Ditto. It says, "It's always the same. They only like me when I'm somebody else. I try to be myself, but they say I'm not good enough. Sometimes I wonder if I'm always be alone, but it turns out that there's always someone who understands." And so the little guy on the right is another Pokemon, and he's kind of like a mimic, and he kind of like looks like Pikachu, like kind of a poor drawing of Pikachu, but he is also sort of a mimic. So another thing that he talks about, another thing from Abbott, is that again, stressing the idea that narrative discourse is different, is that roleplay is not a narrative and it exists in the moment rather than a narrative story is meant to create a story. Now, the author argued differently, and she said that roleplay and narrative are different, but roleplay in this instance is more of a seed for a story, and it's not meant to be performed as like kind of in the moment thing, but it's meant to be a vehicle for fan fiction. So the final topic that I'm going to be covering is the idea of critical response to text. So another thing that she talked about was the idea of the critical response. So fan fiction allows people to match their own identities that are often marginalized. So it creates a safe space for writers to express themselves without exclusion due to factors like sexual orientation and gender. So the two examples that they mention in this article is the idea of women in fan fiction. So often and not, it allows women to create strong female characters that they're often not represented in certain genres such as high fantasy and science fiction. And it allows them to play with ideas of masculinity by adopting male characters in roleplay. And often or not, they're writing their own ideal version of masculinity. So I've gone into two examples. This is kind of the one on the left is LOTR, and on the one on the right is Star Wars. So the other one that they talk about is slash fiction, which is fiction that explores non-heterosexual relationships. And so basically by using this, people can explore their own sexual identity and orientation. And so two examples that I gave that were not in the text, but to get a better idea of what I was talking about, is the one on the left is what they call Johnlock, which is John and Sherlock. And the other one on the right is Destiel, which is Dean, and Castiel, and that's from Supernatural. So another thing they talk about is the idea of further research, which is things like that this creates literary practices and hybrid textualities that can be used that are different from traditional media that are worthy of further examination. And the one thing I did want to talk about that wasn't because it is mentioned in the beginning is the idea of fan fiction as identity play. So one of the things that they say in the title is the idea of affective play. So this has to deal with like playing with your own identities. So it's the idea that activities that challenge the boundaries between internal events and external works of art. So in a way they say that fan fiction is this affective play because it allows people to live amid the text. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.